Senator from Connecticut.
Thank you, Madam President. Colleagues, the Trump administration has us stuck in a humiliating quagmire, a total deadlock in Iran. We are wasting billions of taxpayer dollars dropping bombs and firing missiles at Iran. Iran responds with escalation. They keep the strait closed. They attack our bases. They attack our allies in the region. The war just expands and expands and expands. In the last week, for instance, a new war is threatening to break out between Yemen and Saudi Arabia, which would likely result in the other strait at the bottom of the Red Sea being closed as well. Trump personally pays no price for this stalemate. His corruption schemes, his cryptocurrency, his insider trading, the contracts to his sons, all of that has practically tripled his net worth in just 18 short months in office. No, the price of this war is being plainly paid, first and foremost, by our soldiers, who are being put in harm's way for a war that is making America weaker every day. They're getting killed. They're sustaining life-altering injuries. Many of our soldiers and sailors and airmen have been in the region far past their scheduled deployment. They haven't seen their families in years. And of course, American consumers are paying the price as well. Here's the most relevant chart. This is familiar to you. This is what gas prices were doing until the war. They are creeping back well above $4 a gallon right now. That is not affordable for regular Americans, especially Americans who have to travel great distances for work, especially small business owners who rely on reasonable gas prices in order to be able to make their bills work. Diesel prices are through the roof as well. Fertilizer prices are through the roof as well, all because of this war. No other reason, the war. The prices are this high because of the war. It's farmers, it's small business owners, it's the American public who are paying the price, not Donald Trump. And so that's why the war is just wildly unpopular. Like, except for Trump's sort of hardline supporters, the folks who just don't believe he can ever do anything wrong, nobody wants this war. If you're in a red state or a blue state, this war is deeply unpopular because the American public are smart. They're smarter than a lot of my colleagues give them credit for. They know that a war with Iran is unwinnable. They don't want America stuck again in a quagmire, a stalemate in the Middle East. So how does Trump handle this? A deeply unpopular war, a war that he is losing, a war that is driving up prices for the American public. Well, this is how he handles it. He gaslights. He tells lies. And the essential gaslight is that the war is about to end. Don't worry. Yes, it appears that there is no end. It appears that you're going to have to continue to pay these prices forever. It appears that America has no end game, but don't worry, the war is about to end. And so I just want to go through this pattern for you because it is really important to talk about the fact that the White House is just not being straight with the American public about what's going on in this war. Over and over again, the president declares that the war is about to be over. He's not telling the truth. He normally declares that the war is about to be over on Sunday night or Monday morning, right before the markets open. But now that we are 6 months into this war, we can see the pattern. Let me go through it with you quickly. On March 23rd, Trump announces a deal. I'm just going to give you his quotes here. These are his words. He says, the United States of America and the country of Iran have had over the last 2 days very good and productive conversations regarding a complete and total resolution of our hostilities in the Middle East. The market impact is immediate. That post sends oil prices tumbling nearly 11%, but there is no deal. He just made it up. 2 days later, the United States military is back to conducting strikes. Quote, the U.S. Abraham Lincoln continues flight operations against military targets in Iran while sailing in regional waters. On March 30th, Trump announces another deal. This is Monday morning, right before the markets open. He says the United States of America is in serious discussions with a new and more reasonable regime to end our military operations in Iran. Great progress has been made. 1 week later, there's no deal. The opposite. 1 week later, Trump posts that he's going to wipe out the entire civilization of Iran. A whole civilization will die tonight, he posts, never to be brought back again. That's a war crime. The president is promising to kill millions of civilians. He tries to dial it back. But later on that same day, he's back to announcing a deal. Literally, I'm going to wipe out a whole civilization that morning. That night, on April 17th, he says, well, we received a 10-point proposal from Iran, and I believe it is a workable basis on which to negotiate. A 2-week period will allow the agreement to be finalized and consummated. 5 days later, there's no deal. Trump announces a resumption of the war with Iran. Now, let's fast forward 10 days later to April 17th. He posts that a deal with Iran is imminent. This process should go very quickly. Most of the points are already negotiated, he posts. 2 days later, the strikes start again. On May 5th, Trump says, great progress being made toward a complete and final agreement with the representatives of Iran. Complete is capitalized, final is capitalized, agreement is capitalized, representatives is capitalized, Iran is capitalized. 2 days later, the deal's off. Surprise, surprise. Every time Trump announces a deal is imminent, it just disappears. U.S. forces intercepted unprovoked Iranian attacks and responded with self-defense strikes, CENTCOM announces 2 days later. On May 25th, right before the markets open, a deal is imminent. Quote, negotiations with the Islamic Republic of Iran are proceeding nicely, right before the markets open. That same day, the United States military conducts strikes on Iran. Quote, the U.S. forces conducted self-defense strikes in southern Iran today to protect our troops from threats posed by Iranian forces. Next Monday, right before the markets open, Trump posts, Iran wants to make a deal. It'll be a good one. Just sit back and relax. It'll work out well in the end. It always does. How is this working out well for the American public? How is that working out well for the American public? The next day, there's no deal. The United States conducts strikes against Iran. On June 17th, Trump actually signs a deal, but it's not a real deal. He does this whole pomp and circumstance signing ceremony in Versailles. That deal was negotiated by diplomatic amateurs. There was nothing actually agreed to. There were words on a page, but from the literal moment the ink was dry, nobody could explain what they had agreed to. Most significantly, Iran thought that the agreement obligated Israel to stop its military operations in Lebanon. Israel did not agree to that. Iran thought that it had been given control of the strait in that agreement. Apparently, the American delegation didn't think they made that concession. Anyway, that agreement lasts 10 days. On June 27th, Trump posts that strikes on Iran have resumed. Let's just fast forward to the last week, because Trump is doing it again. On August 1st, Trump posts that I'm not sure that I transcribed this wrong or not, but it looks like he says the perimeters of a deal. I'll give him credit that he said parameters. The parameters of a deal have been agreed to on August 1st. On August 2nd, the deal is imminent, having to do with the Strait of Hormuz and ultimately the denuclearization of Iran. The deal is imminent on the denuclearization of Iran. August 4th, just a night or two ago, Trump tells Fox News, we're having very good discussions. Meanwhile, there are reports that Iran isn't even talking to the United States. Trump's saying a deal on the denuclearization of Iran is imminent, and Iran is saying we're not even in the room. I mean, we should not accept this level of gaslighting. The word of the president has to matter. Over and over again, on 11 different instances, Trump says, a deal is about to happen. Don't worry, the war is about to be over. There's no deal. None of it is real, these promises. I wish it were real. I want to be clear about that. I want the war to end. I would basically support any agreement at this point to end this war. I was glad that the president got a ceasefire, but I could tell by the terms it wasn't going to last. It wasn't a real agreement. But at this point, many of us are willing to support almost any agreement. It'll be a humiliating agreement. It will be one in which Iran will essentially declare victory. But this war is a disaster. America is losing. Consumers can't afford to pay these prices. Businesses are going under. We had a record of farm bankruptcies in the last year. We look like a laughing stock. And we're running out of munitions. We don't have what we need to protect ourselves anymore. Reports are that we've gone through half of our Tomahawks. Our allies in the region have fired 70 to 80% of their Patriot missiles. This is a crisis. It has to end. But maybe there's an explanation for why Trump continues to do this gaslighting, particularly right before the markets open. Trump announced, now a week or so ago, that if you pay him $100,000 a month, he will give you advance notice of American foreign policy decisions. I don't understand why that is acceptable to anybody in this chamber. If you pay Donald Trump $100,000, he will give you advance notice of America's foreign policy decisions. If we are about to sign a peace treaty and you give him $100,000 a month, he will give you advance notice of that. If strikes are going to resume against Iran, if you pay him $100,000 a month, he will give you advance notice of that. That is a subscription service for insider trading. And it is unquestionably lucrative. On August 1st, Trump posts that a deal is imminent. Remember, people still take him seriously. Not everybody knows about this history of gaslighting. On August 1st, Trump says a deal is imminent, and the market impact is immediate. Oil prices fall by 5% right as the markets open. The next day, right before the markets open, Trump says again, the deal is imminent. Another 5% drop. And so you see how his statements move the market. And you can see how if you get advance notice of those statements, even by a few seconds, you can capitalize on that market movement. If you know that if Trump says a deal is imminent and the markets are going to move 5%, and you pay $100,000 to Donald Trump to get that information early, you can make a boatload of money. And so maybe the war continues because Trump has found a way to monetize the war in a disgustingly corrupt way. I get that at some point we become immune to all of this. But can any of my Republican colleagues defend the president selling announcements from the White House for $100,000 a month in the middle of a war? Is any Republican senator willing to come down to this floor and defend the President of the United States setting up a subscription service for public policy announcements from the White House so as to advantage certain players in the marketplace who are willing to pay that amount of money? Of course not. And if you know in your heart that it is corrupt, that it is wrong, then you should say something about it. Because the war might be continuing, not just because of incompetence, but because the president has found a way to make money. More people are going to pay him $100,000 for these announcements in the middle of a war. Frankly, people would be willing to pay it absent a war, but he'll make more money during a war because his announcements clearly move the market in the middle of a very complicated conflict where the decisions of the United States government immediately change oil markets. The reason that this war is dragging on endlessly, it does matter. And my colleagues should care about Trump's insider trading subscription scheme. It's just so discouraging that nobody on the other side of the aisle says anything about this, when the credibility of the White House and of our country is just getting destroyed and sullied. But my Republican colleagues should also care that the war is being waged with a level of embarrassing incompetence that is making America weaker, that's getting us nowhere. This body works best when the president's party stands up to him and says, enough, whether it's corruption or incompetence. That's what President Johnson's party did during the Vietnam War. It is actually what the Democratic Party did with President Obama during the late stages of the Afghanistan war, when many of us decided that America had to withdraw and opposed President Obama's party. It's what many of us did here during the early stages of the war in Yemen, that President Obama was bringing the American military into, and many of us opposed it, got up on this floor, explained why we opposed it. Republicans can do that too. You can say this war has to end. You can say that the president should never, ever personally benefit from a conflict overseas. You can say that the president of the United States should not sell access to White House statements. It would make a big difference for our democracy and for the American people who are paying through the nose for the costs of this war if you did. I yield the floor.
The member from Florida.
Thank you, Madam President. Today, I have the honor of rising in recognition of a true Florida hero. And I know we hear a lot these days about entire political parties adopting platforms that want to defund and abolish the police. In Florida, we do it a different way, an entirely different way. In fact, we watch what other crazy places are doing, and we just do the opposite, and it's worked out pretty well. One of my favorite parts of my job as a U.S. Senator now, having been the Florida Attorney General working with law enforcement for many, many years, is to spotlight Florida's brave law enforcement heroes when they do something uniquely heroic that shows why a free society operating under a rule of law has to have brave men and women to answer a call and stand on a line to bravely serve us. And today, it's an honor to recognize Lee County Sheriff's Office Deputy Raymond Tellez Ferial with a Florida's Finest Award. Earlier this year, Deputy Tellez Ferial saved the lives of 3 young girls. Many people know Florida is a peninsula. We are surrounded by the ocean. On this particular day, there was a rip current very close to shore. And if you've lived in Florida for any time, or if even you've traveled to Florida, you know that rip currents can be incredibly deadly, pulling even expert swimmers out to sea very quickly. And on this day, it was supposed to be a time of fun in the sun, and it almost turned deadly when 3 young girls got caught in a very strong rip current, and they were struggling to stay above water and get back to shore. Now, Deputy Tellez Ferial was on patrol in full uniform, just going about his day, protecting Floridians. He heard bystanders screaming for help. He immediately ran over, and without hesitation, he went into the water to rescue these 3 young girls. He grabbed flotation devices and started swimming. Thankfully, he was able to get them back to shore safely. And in this area, the strong rip current was really pushing all of them out. And it was because of his bravery and his quick thinking that these girls are still alive. And while this instance had a happy ending, it is worth reminding Floridians and everyone heading to Florida, and we know that there are many moving to Florida. Doesn't matter where I go in the nation, someone I talked to just had a family member move to my home state and is one of my new constituents. But it's always important to remind everyone that lives in Florida or visits our state's beaches of the hidden dangers of rip currents. There have already been 8 confirmed deaths due to rip currents since the start of this year in Florida. So we always advise folks to swim with a partner, consider swimming when there's a lifeguard on duty, and identify and know what each beach warning flag means. But today is about recognizing Deputy Tellez Ferial, recognizing that he was there that day because he was serving his community as a guardian, someone that signed up to put his safety behind the safety of others. And I, for one, I'm incredibly honored, incredibly thankful there are people like Deputy Tellez Ferial and others who answer the call so bravely to serve others as their profession. Law enforcement officers do so much every day to keep us safe, and it's always such a joy to highlight those who show exceptional bravery and save lives. So, Madam President, I thank you very much for the time that we were able to recognize one of Florida's finest, Lee County Sheriff's Office Deputy Raymond Tellez Ferial. I yield back.
The senator from Florida.
I'm tasked with many duties today. I ask unanimous consent that the Senate resume legislative session and be in a period of morning business with senators permitted to speak therein for up to 10 minutes each.
Without objection.
I ask unanimous consent that the Senate proceed to the immediate consideration of calendar number 434 S3266.
The clerk will report.
Calendar number 434 S3266, a bill to support the athletic programs of the United States Merchant Marine Academy.
Without objection, the Senate will proceed to the measure.
Madam President, I ask unanimous consent that the committee reported substitute amendment be agreed to, the bill as amended be considered read a third time and passed, and that the motions to reconsider be considered made and laid upon the table.
Without objection.
Madam President, I also ask unanimous consent that the Senate proceed to the immediate consideration of calendar number 198 S434.
The clerk will report.
Calendar number 198 S434, a bill to establish the Commercial Space Activity Advisory Committee and for other purposes.
Without objection, the Senate will proceed to the measure.
Madam President, I also ask unanimous consent that the committee reported substitute amendment be withdrawn, the Peters substitute amendment at the desk be agreed to, the bill as amended be considered read a third time and passed, and that the motions to reconsider be considered made and laid upon the table.
Without objection.
Madam President, I understand that there are two bills at the desk due for a second reading en bloc.
The leader is correct. The clerk will read the titles of the bills for a second time en bloc.
S5271, a bill to amend the Help America Vote Act of 2002 to require voters to provide photo identification. HR 7008, an act to amend Chapter 131 of Title V to require certain restrictions on stocks for members of Congress and their spouses and dependents and for other purposes.
Madam President, in order to place the bills on the calendar under the provisions of Rule 14, I would object to further proceeding en bloc.
Objection having been heard, the bills will be placed on the calendar under the provisions of Rule 14.
And Madam President, I have four requests. This was from earlier, so. That's from earlier. No, you can go ahead. I have four requests for committees to meet during today's session of the Senate. They have the approval of the majority and minorities leader.
Duly noted.
And Madam President, I ask unanimous consent that the Senate resume executive session.
Without objection.
Mr. President.
The senator from Maine.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, I will soon ask that the Senate pass Senate Bill 2398, the Hagan Tick Reauthorization Act. Mr. President, the Tick Act was approved by the Senate Health Committee more than a year ago with strong bipartisan support. I am proud to have authored the original Tick Act in 2019 with my colleague, Senator Tina Smith. Our bipartisan legislation strengthens federal efforts to confront the alarming public health threat posed by Lyme disease and other tick-borne illnesses. Mr. President, the Tick Act essentially has three parts. First, it reauthorizes funding for the CDC's 4 Centers for Excellence in vector-borne diseases. Second, it extends grants to state and local public health departments to help them treat, test for, and conduct public education campaigns about ticks and other vector-borne diseases. And third, it requires HHS to implement its national strategy to combat vector-borne diseases. Mr. President, our bill is named after our former colleague, Senator Kay Hagan. Kay, with whom I had the pleasure of serving, passed away in October of 2019 at the age of 66 from complications of a deadly tick-borne illness known as the Powassan virus. It is my hope that reauthorizing the Tick Act will help prevent future tragedies such as this one. Tick-borne diseases are a major public health concern, and the incidence has exploded over the past 20 years. Each year, the state of Maine has hit a new record high in the number of cases for Lyme disease. Last year, Maine reported 4,257 cases. Undoubtedly, that understates the number of cases because many are not reported. But that amount alone is more than double the number of cases reported in my home state just 6 years ago. Current projections show that 2026 will yet again be a record-setting year. This is a record that we do not want to set. The Lewis and Sun Journal reported just last week that every community in Maine's Franklin County faces a high risk of tick encounters for this season. Mr. President, nevertheless, I am encouraged that we are making progress, and we have made progress in the 6 years since this law was first enacted. For example, a clinical trial for a Lyme disease vaccine is underway right now at the Maine Health Institute for Research. Mr. President, it's always struck me as ironic that every year my beloved Labrador retriever can get a vaccine for tick diseases, and yet we cannot, we humans cannot. And I'm hoping this clinical trial will be successful and it will make a real difference. Reauthorizing the Hagan Tick Act would allow crucial projects such as vet research and others across the United States and public education campaigns, which are so important in teaching people what to do if they have a tick bite. That will all be allowed to continue. I want to thank Senator Schmitt for partnering with me on this reauthorization, and I would note that we have 21 bipartisan co-sponsors. I urge all of my colleagues to support this life-saving legislation. Mr. President, as if in legislative session and notwithstanding Rule 22, I ask unanimous consent that the Senate proceed to the immediate consideration of calendar number 154, Senate Bill 2398.
The clerk will report.
Calendar number 154, S2398, a bill to reauthorize the Hagan Tick Act and for other purposes.
Without objection, the Senate will proceed to the measure.
Mr. President, I ask unanimous consent that the committee reported substitute amendment be considered and agreed to, and that the bill as amended be considered read a third time.
Without objection.
Mr. President, I know of no further debate on the bill as amended.
Is there further debate? Hearing none. The question is on passage of the bill as amended. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All opposed, no. Ayes appear to have it. The ayes do have it. The bill as amended is passed.
Mr. President, I ask unanimous consent that the motions to reconsider be considered made and laid upon the table.
Without objection.
Thank you, Mr. President.
The senator from Colorado.
Mr. President, I ask for unanimous consent for the Senate to pass S1838, the DeOndra Dixon Include Project Act. Thousands of Americans live with Down syndrome, and yet research has been underfunded for decades. In 2017, Congress encouraged the National Institutes of Health, the NIH, to launch the Include Project, an effort to make groundbreaking discoveries about conditions that disproportionately affect people with Down syndrome, like Alzheimer's disease. The Include Project brings together multiple NIH institutes under a coordinated approach that is already delivering significant scientific discoveries as well as new treatments. The bipartisan, bicameral DeOndra Dixon Include Project Act will officially authorize the Include Project into law. The bill will ensure that Congress and the American people have visibility into the scientific breakthroughs that are so needed for this community. The Include Project is already yielding significant scientific results, and Colorado is at the core of these scientific advancements. So, Mr. President, today Colorado is proudly home to the world's leading Down syndrome advocacy, research, and medical care partners at the Global Down Syndrome Foundation, the Linda Cernick Institute for Down Syndrome, the Alzheimer's and Cognition Center, and the C Center at Children's Hospital, Colorado. We need to make sure that improving health outcomes for individuals with Down syndrome remains a priority, and do so in honor of DeOndra Dixon, an extraordinary person who was an advocate, leaving a legacy that will help improve lives for generations. This bill has support on both sides of the aisle, including Senators Jerry Moran and Cory Booker, and Representatives Diana DeGette and Richard Hudson. We also thank Senators Bennett, Padilla, Capito, Coons, Van Hollen, and Ossoff for their support. We are determined to get this bill across the finish line for DeOndra and for, let me make sure I've lost that, and make sure that we get this across the line for DeOndra and for the thousands of Americans who will see their lives improved for the better by this critical research. As in legislative session and notwithstanding Rule 22, I ask unanimous consent that the Committee on Health, Education, Labor, and Pensions be discharged and the Senate proceed to the immediate consideration of Senate Bill 1838.
Clerk will report.
S. 1838, a bill to amend the Public Health Service Act to authorize the Secretary of Health and Human Services to carry out a program of research, training, and investigation related to Down syndrome and for other purposes.
Without objection, the committee is discharged, and the Senate will proceed.
Mr. President, I ask unanimous consent that the Hickenlooper substitute amendment at the desk be agreed to and that the bill as amended be considered read a third time.
Without objection.
I know of no further debate on the bill as amended.
Is there further debate? Hearing none, the question is on passage of the bill as amended. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All opposed, no. The ayes appear to have it. The ayes do have it. The bill as amended is passed.
Mr. President, I ask unanimous consent that the motion to reconsider be considered made and laid upon the table.
Without objection. The senator from Maine.
Mr. President, I'm very pleased that we could pass these two very important bills this afternoon. I would be remiss if I did not mention that the University of Maine has an excellent lab that specializes in testing ticks for pathogens. And it has worked very closely with our game wardens, with foresters, with others who are routinely in the woods of Maine and are exposed to tick bites. It actually has developed a little tick kit where you can send the tick into the lab and it will be tested for pathogens. So I would be remiss if I did not salute the University of Maine for its excellent work on tick-borne illnesses. This legislation is going to make a big difference in helping to advance their work, as well as the research at the Maine Health Research Institute. Thank you, Mr. President. Thank you.
President,
Recognize the senator from Colorado.
I also would be remiss if I didn't recognize once again the incredible partners that have been behind this Down syndrome advocacy, research, and medical care. Primarily the Global Down Syndrome Foundation, but also the Linda Cernick Institute for Down Syndrome, the Alzheimer's and Cognition Center, and the C Center at Children's Hospital, Colorado. Thank you.
I recognize the Democrat whip.
Mr. President, a few years ago, I met a young woman who lives in the Chicago suburbs. She told me a story of her college career and what it led to. It was something I'd never heard before. Her experience in trying to pursue a degree leading to law enforcement took her not to the normal, predictable academic sources, but to a new industry which was opening up in our country, for-profit colleges and universities. Hers was a sad story. She had been enrolled in one of these for-profit colleges and paid the tuition, took the courses, some of them in person, some of them online, and ultimately went to a counselor and asked if she was headed for a bachelor's degree because of her coursework, and he assured her that she was. She went on to say that she hoped to be able to get into law enforcement. That was her ultimate goal. He gave her assurances that that would happen. She finished her degree at this for-profit college and university in Chicago, and then took her certificate showing her graduation to would-be employers, police departments in the area. They laughed at her, and they said, that's not a real school. That's a for-profit school, and the courses you took don't count. If you want a degree in law enforcement that leads to a real job, you can't get it from a for-profit college and university. Well, that was a heartbreak to her because she spent years working on it. But what was even worse was she was so deeply in debt for student loans that she borrowed from this phony university. She, when I met her, was living in her parents' basement, had no future ahead of her for doing what she thought was the right thing, getting a college degree. What she didn't know and what we know now is that there are two numbers that tell the story of for-profit colleges and universities. You hear their names, like the University of Phoenix. That's probably the most prominent one people hear over and over. And you see their advertisements and brochures that are mailed to high school seniors, enticing them to sign up for these for-profit schools. What you don't know is that although only 8% of high school graduates go to for-profit colleges and universities, 8%, 30% of all student loan defaults are the students from these same schools. What's going on here? Such a low number, 8% going on to these schools, and such a high number of loan defaults. That's because they issue worthless degrees and entice these students into deep debt. Many times a parent or even a grandparent will co-sign on the loans for these for-profit schools. And when everything falls apart, as it's likely to, everybody's held liable and responsible. That's why we've had an ongoing battle here in Washington for years against the for-profit college and university industry. There was a legal battle in a case called Sweet versus McMahon, which has gone on for years. It finally, this week, came to an end. And it's an important case on the subject of for-profit colleges and universities. It was the largest class action settlement against the federal government in the history of our nation. That's life-changing news for nearly 500,000 federal student loan borrowers who will receive $23 billion in relief after being misled and defrauded by for-profit colleges. If you listen to the radio on your morning commute or watch TV after a long day's work, then you have no doubt been hit with flashy advertising from institutions like the University of Phoenix looking to lure in unsuspecting students. Here's the catch. These institutions often rip off those students, lying about their prospects for a job, their ability to have credits to transfer to any other school, or their likely salary after graduation. In fact, these schools, as I mentioned, enroll only 8% of the students, but account for 30% of all federal student loan defaults. Too much debt, too little education. NPR recently highlighted the story of Jessica Feint of Michigan. She enrolled at the University of Phoenix to study psychology. She said she, quote, paid a lot out of pocket and through student loans. She realized later that the school's recruitment counselor had repeatedly misled her, including by telling her that a degree would be accepted by Michigan graduate programs. That was false. By the time she learned her degree was useless, she was already underwater and deeply in debt. So she joined this class action lawsuit, originally filed during President Trump's first term, to get relief. 4 years later, it took 4 years, she'll finally see the relief which she was entitled to. The first Trump administration, go figure, denied nearly all of these claims by the students, which a federal court described as, quote, disturbingly Kafkaesque. But in 2022, President Joe Biden and his administration settled the case and forgave the student loans and debts of nearly 300,000 borrowers who had been defrauded. Under the terms of that settlement, borrowers who were not part of the original class had 5 months to file claims. If the Department of Education had not adjudicated the additional claims by early 2026, borrowers still waiting in limbo would be automatically entitled to relief. But while the Trump administration can quickly greenlight permanent tax breaks for the wealthiest Americans, as in their so-called big beautiful bill, they hesitated when it came to giving relief to these students who just wanted a fair shot. In late 2025, the Trump administration asked for an additional 18 months to review the students' claims, students who were defrauded by these schools. A federal district judge said, enough. Last month, a panel of 3 judges from the U.S. Circuit Court of Appeals for the Ninth Circuit unanimously upheld this decision. Good. Like their tactics with DACA recipients and the slow walking of renewal applications with the USCIS, the administration was asking for more time so that they could bleed out these borrowers and deny relief to hundreds of thousands of students deep in debt, living in their parents' basement, trying to figure out if they had a future. This is where the priorities lie. I am glad these borrowers, after years and years of waiting, will finally get the relief they are entitled to. Mr. President, for the last 15 years or more, I've sent a letter to every high school counselor in the state of Illinois. I sent it about the first of the year and warned them, be careful not to let your students be lured into these for-profit colleges and universities. They're going to send them brochures, they're going to team them up with all sorts of things on the internet. It'll be a dazzling display about a college which is not a real college. It's a for-profit college and university. Be careful. The time that you spend there, the money that you spend there may be a total waste or worse. It could be a debt that trails you for years and years, if not decades, in your life. Thank goodness for these students. There's thousands of students who were benefited by President Biden's decision. The courts finally stood by them and gave these students a second chance. It's been a situation I've run into time and again. I have threatened some of these for-profit schools as a way of getting them to drop the loans that they were enforcing on these students, because I know what happens in the end. Students need to be careful. You can't go wrong starting with city colleges and community colleges in your community. It's affordable. There are alternatives there. Most of the time, these hours that you earn there are going to be transferable to real colleges and universities. I beg my young students in Illinois to start there, and the student counselors to do their job and discourage kids from getting involved with these for-profit schools. Mr. President, I'm going to yield the floor after asking unanimous consent to place in the record another statement about energy grant funding unrelated to the earlier statement.
Without objection.
Thank you, Mr. President. I yield the floor. Suggest the absence of a quorum.
The clerk will call the roll.
Ms. Alston-Brooks.
I recognize the senator from Louisiana.
I ask that the quorum call be vitiated.
Without objection.
Mr. President, as you know, one of the privileges of being a senator is the opportunity to work alongside dedicated, talented staff. They take the senator's ideas, concepts, and turn them into real legislation that improves the lives of our constituents. It improves our country. Without them, we are unable to do our jobs. As I near the end of my career in Congress, I reflect on the staff who have come and gone and the work we have done that will have a lasting impact on the nation. Today, I honor an invaluable member of my team, my Help Committee Deputy Staff Director, Danielle Janowski. She is leaving Capitol Hill after nearly 17 years of service. Danielle joined my Help Committee leadership team in 2023 when I became the ranking member. She had previously worked in the House and for Senators Ernst and Thune. As Deputy Staff Director, she kept the trains moving. She made sure that staff was all rowing in the same direction and that every committee product was done on time and was of the highest quality. Danielle is an institutionalist at heart, and it was through that lens she always fought for the Help Committee to be strategic, thorough, and professional. She cares about this institution and what it represents. She views it as her duty to mentor other young staffers to carry forward the traditions and collaboration that the Senate deserves. It is because of her leadership that the Help Committee has been successful in getting bills signed into law that lower the cost of health care, strengthen our education system, empower workers, and enhances our retirement system. Importantly, Danielle has been a leader in the fight for life. She spearheaded my work to protect unborn babies and mothers, an issue so important to me and to the people of Louisiana. Her passion for this cause, and her deep connection with the pro-life community made her indispensable and an effective champion. She was instrumental in leading the first pro-life hearing this Congress, my investigation into abortion pill manufacturers harming mothers, and our efforts to eliminate funding for Planned Parenthood in the Working Families Tax Cuts. None of this would have been possible without her passion, strategic guidance, and unrelenting determination. Babies' lives have been saved, and families are better off because of the work that she led. And what can be more important than that? What Danielle will be most remembered for on our help team is her exceptional leadership and friendship. She is beloved by everyone who worked with her, a trusted and calming presence during transitions and chaotic times. When there was conflict or when staff simply needed someone to talk to, Danielle was there. She is an advocate, a mentor, a sounding board, and a friend to everyone. Her departure is not only a loss for my office, but for the entire Capitol Hill community. But our loss is someone else's gain. I am proud she will continue her public service at the Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services, leading policy to improve families' health and driving down the cost of care. She will continue to make a positive difference and be an invaluable partner to those who remain in Congress. I look forward to working with her in this new capacity. It's been a pleasure to watch Danielle grow as a leader and as a person. I thank her for her service to my office, to the Senate, to the nation. With that, I yield, and I note the absence of a quorum.
The clerk will call the roll.
Ms. Alston-Brooks.
Without objection.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, I rise today to honor one of the greatest teams to ever wear the black and gold, the 1960 Missouri Tigers. They finished 11-0. They conquered the Big Eight. They defeated the Navy midshipmen 21-14 in the Orange Bowl in Florida. But their greatness can't be measured by their record alone. Their story is about something deeper: perseverance after humiliation, accountability in the face of injustice, and the integrity of men who kept their word. To understand what they accomplished, we must go back 2 years. Dan Devine arrived at Missouri in 1958 and inherited a program searching for its footing. His first team brought one terrible afternoon in Norman, Oklahoma. The Sooners beat Missouri 39-0. It was a humiliating, dismantling, and devastating loss. After the game, Coach Devine stood before his players in the visiting locker room, knowing full well many of those men would graduate having never beaten OU. But Devine looked at the younger men and made a promise. 2 years from that day, Missouri would return to Norman, and Missouri would win. That was no small pledge. Oklahoma ruled the conference at that time. The Sooners hadn't lost a conference game at home since 1942. Norman was where the soaring dreams of visiting teams came crashing down to reality. But a promise had been made by Coach Devine. So for 2 years, the Tigers went to work. By the fall of 1960, Missouri had become a machine, powerful, disciplined, relentless. The Tigers went into Happy Valley and beat Penn State. They traveled to Lincoln, Nebraska and shut out the Cornhuskers. They defeated the powerhouse that was Colorado. 8 games, 8 victories. Not a single team put up double digits against them. Then came the return to Norman. Oklahoma struck first. For a moment, the Tigers were seeing ghosts. For a moment, the boys in black and gold had Boomer Sooner ringing in their ears. For a moment, it felt like 1958 all over again. But this Missouri team did not panic. It answered. Norris Stevenson, one of the great pioneers in Mizzou history, tore down the sideline for a 77-yard touchdown. Later, with Oklahoma threatening to seize the momentum, Stevenson broke free again, this time from 60 yards out. He finished with 169 rushing yards and 2 touchdowns. Missouri finished with 41 points. And when the clock hit triple zeros, the scoreboard read Missouri 41, Oklahoma 19. 2 years from the humiliating loss on the field, Dan Devine and his players walked out of Norman as victors, the promise they had kept. The Tigers returned home undefeated and ranked #1 in the nation. Only one obstacle remained between Missouri and an unblemished regular season. Unfortunately, that obstacle was Kansas. Now, Mr. President, rivalry games can produce strange results. Sometimes the underdog rises. Sometimes the favorite has an off day. And sometimes, Mr. President, Kansas simply uses a player who wasn't eligible to be on the field. The Jayhawks defeated Missouri on the scoreboard. For a few brief and fraudulent weeks, they called themselves conference champs, but there was a problem. The Jayhawks had discovered that the only way they could execute better than Missouri was by breaking the rules. The Big Eight ordered Kansas to forfeit the victory and strip the Jayhawks of the conference title. Kansas could keep the memory of the final whistle. Missouri kept the title. That distinction matters. A football game, yes, is a contest of strength, but is a contest that's governed by rules. Without rules, victory means nothing. A championship obtained by cheating is not a championship at all. The people of Kansas have spent more than 6 decades trying to turn a blatant penalty into a moral victory. But the truth is harder to bear, and facts are stubborn things. Missouri finished 11-0, reminding the conference and the American populace that cheaters never truly win. But Missouri's season wasn't finished. On January 2nd, 1961, the Tigers took the field in Miami against 4th-ranked Navy. Watching from the stands was President John F. Kennedy. Navy had a Heisman Trophy winner named Joe Bellino. Missouri had a defense built to break the will of its opponent. The Tigers held that year's Heisman just to 4 rushing yards. Heisman winner just to 4 rushing yards. Then they overcame a 98-yard fumble return. They absorbed every blow Navy could deliver. And when the night was over, Missouri had won 21-14, securing the first bowl victory in school history. Mr. President, every generation needs examples of men who stuck to their word. Dan Devine made a promise in the ashes of defeat. His players believed him. His players were descended of those who fought Europe and the Pacific. His players were hardened by parents who had weathered the Great Depression. They accepted their coach's promise as their word when they spent 2 years earning the right to fulfill it. They did not complain about the humiliation they had experienced in Norman. They prepared for a return. They didn't allow the Kansas dishonesty to define their season. They trusted that the truth would prevail. And when adversity followed, then to Miami, they answered it with discipline, toughness, and ultimately victory. More than 6 decades later, the 1960 Tigers still embody the character of Missouri. We are a people who work. We are a people who endure. We are a people who keep our promises. The men of that team brought home a Big 8 championship in the Orange Bowl and the Orange Bowl championship game in a perfect season. But their greatest legacy was the example they left behind. Stand firm, do the work, keep your word. Run the ball, and never surrender what was rightfully yours. Today, I'm proud to honor Coach Dan Devine, Nora Stevenson, and every member of the undefeated 1960 Missouri Tigers. Their promise was kept, their championship was earned, their record remains perfect, and Kansas still lost. Mr. President, as if in legislative session and notwithstanding Rule 22, I ask unanimous consent. The Senate proceed to the consideration of Senate Resolution 833, which is before the desk.
The clerk will report.
Senate Resolution 833, recognizing the 1960 University of Missouri Tigers football team for its undefeated regular season, Orange Bowl victory, and claim to the 1960 national championship.
Is there an objection to proceeding to the measure? Without objection, the Senate will proceed.
Mr. President, I ask unanimous consent the resolution be agreed to, the preamble be agreed to, and the motion to reconsider be considered made and laid upon the table with no intervening action or debate.
Without objection.
Thank you, Mr. President. I yield.
Mr. President,
Senator from New Jersey.
I am grateful for your recognition, Mr. President. And want to try to get this order right. As if in legislative session, I'm going to give some remarks and then ask for a unanimous consent on a bill. But I really want to first talk about something really challenging and tragic that happened in the state of New Jersey. Edwin Lopez Cornejo died. He is dead. And it's a death that did not have to be. He was detained by ICE on June 18th. He was sent to Delaney Hall in my home city in Newark, New Jersey, a detention center, and he never came out alive. 20 years Edwin lived in the United States of America. 20 years of building a life here, 20 years of being connected to people and community, 20 years of making here in America a way forward. And yet, in less than 2 months of detention, the immigration system in our country led to his death. And in Delaney Hall, he's the third person in 9 months to die. The 23rd person to die in ICE custody this year. Not the first warning sign, not the second. This is the third death at the same facility, and yet nothing changes. Let me tell you exactly how Edwin Lopez Cornejo died, because his family deserves to have his name said on the Senate floor and his story told plainly. Edwin had diabetes. He had high blood pressure. He needed his medication to survive, and Delaney Hall denied it to him. The day before he died, he told his mother that his arm had gone numb, half his face had gone numb. And understand, this is not a minor complaint. This was a man that was having a medical emergency, telling someone exactly what happened to his body. Did anyone come to his aid? No. Did he get his medication? No. Less than 24 hours, he was dead. Doctors have warned us. Attorneys have warned us in New Jersey. Families have warned us. A chorus of people in our communities, not politicians, not political activists, doctors, lawyers have been warning us that detainees who walked out of that building with their testimony and the facts and the evidence, people have said over and over again that this facility is dangerous. It is not well run, and within it is a pattern of disregard for human decency. DHS has known that Delaney Hall is nothing short of a travesty since they reopened it over a year ago. So who runs what is, for so many, a house of horrors? Who runs the institution that I saw with myself when I went there and met people? This is not for serious criminals. This is not a place for folks who've done serious crimes in our country. This is a detention facility for people. Many of them have been in our country for decades. Many of them have American spouses, American children. And when I went there, I saw mothers who were recently postpartum who were not getting the support. I saw a woman who lost her child while in that detention facility, had a miscarriage there, and did not get the support that she needed. Story after story, people told me of what is going on there, the horrors that are going on there, and who runs it. The United States government does not run that center. It is a private group called the GEO Group, a private for-profit prison that has high-level Republican officials among its former employees. This group won a $1 billion contract, no competition, no bidding, lots of campaign contributions, a phone call, a signature, and they have $1 billion of taxpayer money. New Jersey had to sue this company just to get health inspectors through the front door of a facility operating on American soil, funded by American taxpayers, and our state couldn't even do basic health inspections. They did not get the permits to open that place. They did not have inspections before they did so. This is a private company taking $1 billion of American taxpayer money. The less they provide sanitary services, the less they provide doctors and medical professionals, the more profit they make off of taxpayers. At whose expense? At the decency of American people and at the expense of the lives of the people who are there. We give them hundreds of millions of dollars. And what are the reports out of Delaney Hall? Spoiled food, contaminated water, staff who retaliate against people brave enough to speak up about the conditions. $1 billion and inadequate accountability. $1 billion and inadequate health care. $1 billion and a man whose face is numb, whose arm is numb, who's asking for help, does not get treatment, does not get health care. So here's the truth. It's clear for the GEO Group that part of their business model is this cruelty. Cut medical staff, skimp on food, let the air conditioning go out during the hottest days in New Jersey, let the roof leak, cram more bodies into less space. Every corner cut is $1 of their profit. Every dollar of their profit is $1 that the GEO Group's executives get to celebrate on their next earning calls. GEO Group stock has more than doubled since February of 2026, more than doubled. You know why? We'll follow the money. $3 million from the GEO Group and its executives went into Donald Trump's campaign, into his PAC, into his inauguration. It's a pay to play that's worse than that. A pay to play and people get hurt. Lives are lost. Over $2 billion in federal contracts to run facilities like Delaney Hall in our country. This is not immigration policy. This is not what we stand for. No one loses their humanity because they're incarcerated. No one should lose their basic rights because they're behind bars. Look, I'm all for what this administration promised it would do. They said they would go after the worst of the worst. They said they would go after the people threatening our communities, menacing our families. We should all be supportive of that. I believe we should have strong borders. I believe we should get criminals off of our streets. But the people actually locked up in that building, in Delaney Hall, we know that more than 70% of the people have never been convicted of a single crime. I met a high school student who had more of a Jersey accent than I do, who just wanted to walk with his class, rounded up. I've had the Catholic Church reach out to me because of the sweeps they're doing around schools and churches. I've had family members beg me to get folks out in order to see their American children hit milestones like birthdays and graduations. I've been appealed to from everyone from priests to Republicans in our community. Many are following our laws, but we in the United States Senate, Congress, we hold the purse strings the administration depends on. We should be a check and a balance. We should demand that our taxpayer dollars are being used. And when we see a body count climbing that is not normal, when we see more and more deaths, when we see a mother's son whose face went numb the night before, we should be asking for action and accountability. Edwin Lopez Cornejo's death was not a tragedy. A tragedy is something that no one could have prevented. This is a choice. Every single day DHS keeps Delaney Hall open is another choice to let this happen again. 3 times already. We should not make this choice. I'm now asking for a unanimous consent to pass the Delaney Hall Closure Act, which will close Delaney Hall within 90 days. They're out of excuses. We are out of time. How many more people should die? So as if in legislative session, and notwithstanding Rule 22, I ask unanimous consent that the Senate proceed to immediate consideration of my bill at the desk, that the bill be considered read 3 times and passed, and that the motion to reconsider be considered made and laid upon the table.
Is there objection?
Mr. President, or Madam President.
The gentleman from New Missouri, excuse me.
Reserving the right to object. Madam President, I rise to address this so-called Delaney Hall Closure Act. My colleague's bill, though, it really doesn't do anything to address the issues that he's raised. It doesn't hire a single doctor. It doesn't add a single nurse. It doesn't require a single inspection. It simply orders the Department of Homeland Security to close Delaney Hall, cancel its contract, and permanently forbid ICE from using the facility again. 2 pages, 3 commands: close it, cancel it, never open it again. That is abolition with a short title. The diagnosis is ideological, and the prescription was written before the patient entered the room. If something goes wrong at a hospital, you investigate what happened. You identify the failure. You discipline the people responsible. You repair the facility, improve the procedures, and make the hospital better. You don't unlock every door, abandon the building, and announce that healthcare itself was the crime. If the bridge needs repair, you fix the bridge. You don't blow it up and congratulate yourself for preventing future traffic accidents. Yet, that is the theory behind this bill. A tragedy did occur. Therefore, Democrats say law enforcement must disappear. But closing Delaney Hall doesn't eliminate the need for detention. It leaves 3 choices: transfer detainees somewhere else, possibly further from their families, lawyers, and doctors, crowd them into another facility, and further strain medical staff, or release people the law says should remain in custody while this ceases the removals, and so they're not completed. The bill provides no replacement capacity, no transfer plan, no continuity of care requirement, no additional medical funding. It removes a 1,000-bed facility from the system and calls the resulting chaos compassion. And let us be clear about why immigration detention exists. It is used to ensure appearances at immigration proceedings, facilitate lawful removals, and to protect the public from criminals. My colleague and my friend from New Jersey says many detainees have not been convicted of crimes. That is beside the point. A person doesn't need a criminal conviction to lack a lawful right to be in the United States of America. That's our immigration laws. That's how we have operated for decades. And anyone detained can leave detention whenever they want. They must simply agree to return to their home country. What Democrats demand is for illegal aliens to remain in America and be above the law. Now, I'm willing to take my colleagues' concerns seriously. If Delaney Hall needs more doctors, let us fund more doctors. If it needs more nurses, better medication tracking, stronger inspections, faster emergency response, or better communication with families, let us write those regulations into law and pay for them. I would gladly work with my friend, the senator from New Jersey, on additional resources for safe and secure ICE detention facilities. But there is one problem. My colleague and others on the side has vowed to not give ICE one more penny. We've just lived through this with the shutdown. We heard these words on the floor from many members of the other side. They also voted against the bill that allocated $45 billion to further fund and sustain the capabilities of ICE in their detention facilities. So the position apparently is this: vote against the beds, vote against the facilities, vow to deny the agency another dollar, then point to a strained condition and demand that the facility close. You can't pull the batteries out of a smoke alarm and then pose behind the ashes demanding to know who failed. You can't starve a system, condemn to strain, and call abolition the only human solution. That is not good faith oversight. That is not serious governance. That is not a viable solution. Democrats oppose the funding needed to enforce the law. They oppose the facilities needed to hold people safely. They oppose the removals that detention makes possible. Then when the system shows any pressure, they point to that pressure as proof that enforcement itself must end. The sequence never changes. Defund, obstruct, investigate, abolish. The goal for many Democrats is very clear. It's not better detention facilities. It's no detention at all. The bill does not make one detention facility safer. It shuts down a facility and pushes the problem somewhere else. Madam President, a serious Senate would let the current investigation run its course, correct failures, and strengthen the system. An unserious Senate shuts down the building and pretends the law no longer needs enforcement. I object to using a pending investigation as a ploy to dismantle law enforcement. I object to defunding ICE and then blaming ICE for lacking resources. Fix what's broken, hold wrongdoers accountable, protect every person in federal custody, of course, but we must enforce the law. And for those reasons, Mr. President, I object.
Objection is heard.
Mr. President.
To recognize the senator from New Jersey.
I appreciate the good faith words of my colleague, and I'll take it to heart that he is against unnecessary deaths, that GEO Group should be investigated thoroughly and held accountable. I do want to make a couple of follow-up points. First of all, I live in Newark, New Jersey. I used to run the police department as its mayor. There's nobody that feels more urgency for public safety in my city than I do, and I hired as many law enforcement officers, worked well with ICE, I worked well with FBI, DOJ, all the federal law enforcement officers in a coordinated effort to protect my community. This idea that Democrats want to defund ICE is wrong. I actually believe we need law enforcement in our communities to keep us safe. I want to make sure that we do it in a way that comports with our values and our decency. Let's be clear. There is no law enforcement agency in America that has more money than ICE has right now. This idea that Democrats have done anything to defund it, right now ICE has more than the FBI, more than the ATF, more than the Coast Guard combined. It is the most well-funded agency there is. And the idea that they cannot provide for the basic needs of people that are in their facilities is a lie. This is not a money problem. ICE has all the money they need, and they're showing an inability to keep their inmates alive. Now, I like my colleague's metaphor that if a bridge is broken, you close the bridge. I know this because, again, I was a mayor. If people were falling through holes in a bridge, we close the bridge. Do the inspections, but don't leave people in a hellscape where people continue to die in that facility. To keep that open is irresponsible. ICE has enough money to transfer people that are a real threat to other facilities. ICE has enough money to run around my state, overspend for real estate, as they've done in one of my towns, throwing cash around in a way that should offend Republicans and anybody fiscally prudent, but not hold the people accountable. Yes, if something is broken, you stop using it. If people are dying because of a defect in a car, you don't use it. If people are falling through holes in a bridge, you close it. We have a responsibility for taxpayers' money, and we have shoveled this agency more money than any law enforcement agency there is, and then we're not doing what's necessary to hold these people, like the GEO Group, accountable. I will continue to stand for law enforcement. One of the reasons why I got elected by my state is because we drove crime down in the city of Newark, and everybody saw it. Investment came back, population came back. I believe in creating safety in my community. This is not about the accusations that somehow Democrats don't believe we should have strong law enforcement. If anybody believes in that, I know my record here in the Senate speaks to that. How can we stand here and allow a facility in which multiple people have died in the most gruesome ways? How can we allow an organization that is supposed to be providing health care but denying it? How can we allow this in accordance with our own values? Enough is enough. Delaney Hall is a nightmare. I did not come to the floor to talk about closing facilities all over the country. I'm talking about one facility with a record for people dying unnecessarily, with a record of people being denied medical care, with a record of people being denied healthy food, one facility that is failing. And to keep it open, for this body to keep it open, waiting for something to change while more people are suffering and may die, is irresponsible beyond compare. I believe there's common ground on both sides of the aisle, where we can achieve the highest levels of safety and also ensure that within our incarcerated facilities, people are treated with dignity. I have worked across the aisle with Senator Lindsey Graham, with Senator Chuck Grassley, with Senator Mike Lee to improve conditions in the Bureau of Prisons. I hope when it comes to ICE facilities in this private for-profit company where people are dying, that we can find some common ground to stop this nightmare from happening. Thank you, Mr. President.
Mr. President.
Chair recognizes the senator from Delaware.
Mr. President, one of the questions we all have to wrestle with in life is, why do the innocent suffer? Why do the righteous find at times the circumstances of their lives to be so painful as to be beyond imagining? And how does one make purpose out of pain? Of all the diseases that afflict mankind, ALS is one of the most cruel. It robs someone of their ability to speak, to walk, to move, to care for themselves, yet leaves them completely present and conscious. Over the 16 years that I've served here in the United States Senate, I have been blessed by visit after visit from families going from office to office to ask, not for themselves, not to lessen their pain or their suffering or their challenges, but to try and turn their experience into a positive investment for others. Lots of different families with lots of different challenges, mostly medical, sometimes the parents of children taken hostage in other countries, or veterans who didn't get the benefits they were entitled to, but often families whose loved ones or who they themselves are suffering with cancer, with Parkinson's, or with ALS. And today I'm coming to the floor to celebrate a great and enduring friendship and partnership that has helped to make a difference in this dread disease. Through some of the visits to my office, I've gotten to know some amazing people. Craig and Kristen Colby of Delaware, Brian Wallach and Sandra Abrevaya, Dan Tate, who I knew from college. And my engagement in trying to tackle the ravages of ALS began earlier. A dear friend from Newark, Delaware, Alex Snyder Mackler, his father, Scott, lived with and then died from ALS. My chief of staff lost his father to ALS. My brother lost his best friend. And now today, my best friend from growing up, Dr. Jack Flynn, is bravely living through what has been a tragic and difficult diagnosis and a steadily worsening condition. And when you meet someone with ALS, they are always accompanied by someone by their side who knows every detail, who helps them to eat, to talk, to live, to communicate. And they are looking for ways to make meaning out of their suffering. Through all of this, I've had an incredible partner and advocate, a dear friend, the senior senator from the state of Alaska, my colleague, Senator Lisa Murkowski. We are the co-chairs of the Senate ALS caucus, and I'm blessed to have her with me on the floor today as we announce the next step forward in our work together on ALS.
Chair recognizes the senator from Alaska.
Mr. President, we go through periods here in the United States Senate where there's frustrating issues that we deal with, hours of unknown as to what's going to happen. Are we going to be able to make something happen? Are we making a difference? And some days can be particularly discouraging. We've got a long way to go before this day is through, but to be here at the midpoint of this day and to be able to, as my colleague and my friend from Delaware has stated, to be able to celebrate an accomplishment is a reminder that we do good here. And we don't do good on our own. It takes teamwork, it takes cooperation and collaboration, it takes advocacy, and this is really what makes me just filled with a level of optimism and hope as we're talking about where we are at this moment for the ALS community. The House passed the Accelerating Access to Critical Therapies for ALS Act. We call it Act for ALS. They passed it a few weeks ago, and then the Senate was able to pass it in wrap-up. Yes, that means it passed by unanimous consent here yesterday. And we're now in this final step a final step of reauthorizing a program that is making a real difference for people living with ALS. And I think it's so important to just take a step back and say, what does that mean? Because we have not found the cure, unfortunately, for ALS. This legislation is not about this magical treatment that has come to be. But what we were able to do, working together now 5 years ago, when we passed the Act for ALS Act, we created this pathway for individuals. It's kind of a roadmap. And we said, if you're not eligible to participate in clinical trials to access investigational treatments, there's another way here for you. We provided some pretty important funding to NIH and to FDA to accelerate the research, to improve the data sharing, to help speed up the development of new therapies. But what really comes about with the Act for ALS is it gives people who are living with ALS the opportunity to try. Just let me try something. It might not work, but let me try, because right now, the diagnosis that I'm living with offers no hope. And so this is something that gives those living with ALS some hope. This is a program that works. And so we passed it 5 years ago. What we have now done is a reauthorization that allows us to build on this progress that we've made to ensure that individuals that are living with ALS can continue to access these clinical trials and the programs that continue to meet the needs of the patients and the researchers. And Senator Coons has mentioned the advocacy, those caregivers, those who stand with and are wrapping their arms and their hearts around their loved ones who are dealing with ALS. This is about hope for them as much as those who are living with this dreaded disease. And my friend has acknowledged the name of those that he calls friends. Dan Tate was able to receive a text message on passage of the reauthorization here, saying, go dudes or something like that. I don't know that I'm a dude, but I loved the enthusiasm that he had. Brian Wallach has been an extraordinary partner in the years. You mentioned Sandra Abrevia, absolutely. And then my personal advocate, my cousin, Jenny Dwyer. It was through Jenny's husband, Pat, that our family learned of ALS, as Pat lived with ALS for eight years. And as a family, we came to not only understand the disease and the awful progression, but it allowed us to understand some of what families who live with the heartbreak, almost daily heartbreak, as you're watching your loved one progress through this diagnosis. So to the advocates, know that your work matters. Know that your stories matter. Know that you have made a difference. So we're pleased to be able to be at this place where we can move to finally get this reauthorization into law. Got to work things through the two bodies here and get it signed in. There's more that we've got to do. We're working on some good things as the co-chairs of the ALS caucus, Justice for ALS Veterans Act, which is a really good one, and the ALS Better Care Act. Again, these address some of the challenges that face individuals with ALS as well as their families when they're trying to access the care, access the benefits after a loved one has passed. We know that for those that are living with ALS, every day matters. Every day is precious, and we cannot afford to lose momentum when promising therapies are being studied. I'm reminded, if not weekly, maybe daily sometimes, that people are waiting. People are waiting, and they're counting on us to show up for them. And so to all those in the ALS community, thank you for your advocacy, thank you for your heart and your passion, your persistence, but also your willingness to open your hearts and to share your stories so that we can also become motivated and tenacious on your behalf. I am very grateful for my friend from Delaware. It is hard as I hear stories of your dear friend and as he goes through these stages of this disease, and know that even though I have not met Jack, he is in my heart as well as the many, many who are we advocating for. And with that, I thank, again, not only Senator Coons, but all members here in the Senate that have joined us in this effort to end ALS. I turn the floor back to
Mr. President, I thank my colleague and friend from the truly great state of Alaska. Our mutual friend Dan Tate, long known here as an active lobbyist who is living with ALS, has been texting the two of us about the impact that this research has had on him and his condition and on many others. He most recently texted me, NIH and FDA have done exceptional work. The Act for ALS bill that we helped get passed 5 years ago that we are now reauthorizing, I'll remind you, initially advocates were seeking $10 million. Do you remember the Ice Bucket Challenge of 2014? They were seeking $10 million in federal medical research. This year it was 115. In total, over the years since we passed this legislation through this chamber, $391 million has been invested. There's today 1,200 people living with ALS enrolled in a landmark genetic study. And there have been significant steps forward in experimental treatments. Dr. Sabrina Paganoni of Mass General Brigham Neuroscience Institute said, "We are at a turning point because we have a greater awareness of ALS, more funding for research than ever before, and more treatments in development than ever before." When Lou Gehrig gave a speech announcing his retirement from baseball, he concluded by saying, "I'm the luckiest guy in the world." And many saw that as a bitter irony because he left an outstanding career in baseball to struggle and suffer through an ultimately terminal disease. But I have to say that I am the luckiest man in the world to have the blessing of the great and enduring friendship of a colleague and partner from Alaska, of the steady and reliable and motivating input of so many advocates and cared for people living with this dread disease, and the lifelong partnership and friendship of an amazing man, Dr. Jack Flynn. In a determined effort to deliver hope and change, Senator Murkowski and I and all of us in this ALS caucus are determined to get this bill to the president's desk, signed into law, and to deliver another generation of medical research to get us closer to that day when no one has to face the diagnosis or live with ALS, and it will be a chapter in our history, not a threat for our future. But for today, in this body, I'm grateful for a chance to celebrate a significant step forward, a unanimous action by this chamber, and the delivery of hope to so many around our nation and our world. Thank you, and with that, Mr. President, we yield the floor.